Coming up on New Day at Arirang. South Korea is expected to see new daily infections way above 50,000 again, potentially reaching a record high on Tuesday. Meanwhile, authorities will decide on whether to ease social distancing restrictions this week. With just less than a month to go until South Korea elects its new president, rival party candidates officially go out on the campaign trail, hoping to sway the hearts of voters from the early hours of Tuesday. And amid escalating tensions over Ukraine, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ordered the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv to close and directed embassy staff to relocate to the western part of the country, citing the dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces on Ukraine's border.
Hello and welcome to this Tuesday edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you ever so much for joining us.
And I'm Kim Mo-gan. It's 8 a.m. in Seoul, Korea, February 15th. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
We are going to start with the COVID-19 situation. Authorities here in South Korea are looking for ways to try and tweak their virus prevention measures in a bid to tackle the spread of the Omicron variant.
And on Tuesday, we're expecting to see the highest number of daily infections. For more on this, our reporter Shin Yoon is here in the studio with us. Good morning, Yoon.
Good morning.
So let's start with the local infections today.
Right, so we may see the highest number of COVID-19 infections on this Tuesday. The daily figure may even reach the low 60,000s. Up to 9 p.m. Monday, the country reported 56,327 infections, and this was nearly 3,000 higher than what had been reported the same time the day before and double the amount from a week ago. Authorities have classified the pandemic as being high risk, which is actually the second highest in their 5-scale system determining the degree of danger. It's the fourth week straight that we've been in this high-risk classification.
And this is mainly due to the fact that more elderly people are contracting the virus, right? Just how many new cases are associated with the senior citizen population in Korea? And is there any way we can interpret this data?
Well, first off, up until the fourth week of January, we actually saw 6,655 people over 60 infected with the virus. But this figure went up to 14,527 by the first week of February. And because seniors are at a higher risk of developing critical illnesses, authorities have raised concerns.
As the overall number of new infections increased, we've also seen the number of seniors over 60 infected double in just a week. This may increase the number of deaths and those who are critically ill.
And I guess we could say there's a silver lining. Omicron is currently the dominant strain in the country. In other words, though it's known to be very contagious, it's not as fatal compared to other variants. But if we're seeing the number of new cases double at speeds like now, and seniors making up a big proportion, we actually might see the number of critically ill patients and deaths go up. So South Korea's medical capacity can handle up to 1,500 critically ill patients without much strain. And as of Monday, we saw this figure go a little over 300.
Now, given the current situation, so are authorities considering easing social distancing measures?
Well, the Prime Minister did say that the government must decide whether to ease these measures this week. The KDC commissioner said she agreed and that if measures are eased, they would include loosening restrictions on operating hours at restaurants and cafes and allowing more people to meet up for social gatherings. As long as changes are made gradually, of course. And the current social distancing measures in place that limit the number of people in a social gathering to 6 people and close restaurants and cafes at 9 p.m. are set to last until February 20th. But authorities hinted that these measures may be eased before this date.
Okay, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But there are also measures specifically tailored for the Omicron variant. Any updates in that regard?
Well, according to their Omicron tailored prevention strategy, authorities have been trying to get more of the population to get tested and treated at home. They even banned online sales and limited the number of kits a person can buy at a store to a maximum of 5 kits from Sunday. And this was to prevent stockpiling or scalping at marked up prices. And following their decision, there has still been a spike in demand for antigen test kits. Likewise, the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety on Monday announced a tentative pricing policy, setting prices prices for kits at 6,000 won per kit. That's around $5. And there will be exceptions to this pricing plan depending on whether or not the pharmacies or convenience stores purchase the kits in bulk. And this policy will run through March 5th for now. Another update is the country's plans on who to administer the fourth vaccine shot to. Health authorities on Monday gave the green light to administering the fourth vaccine shot. First, those with weak immune systems, followed by those in senior care facilities. The fourth COVID-19 vaccine shot can be administered 4 months after the third shot.
Well, Yoon, thank you so much for the information. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we hope you have a great day. Now, we are going to move on to political news, aren't we? A lot going on in South Korea right now. There are just over 3 weeks to go until the country's presidential election. Today marks the beginning of the campaign period, free from a whole slew of legal constraints. Candidates and their supporters can hold rallies using microphones and loudspeakers, which are characteristic of elections here in South Korea. Streets are already starting to be lined with posters and banners as well. Trucks with supporters on board will bring campaign music to every neighborhood, and online and TV advertisements will begin to air as well. The campaigning ends the day before Election Day, which is March 9th. A total of 14 candidates are on the ballot.
Now with that, let's take a look at how the major candidates will be starting their campaigns. First, let's head over to the ruling Democratic Party's candidate, Lee Jae-myung, who's candidate number 1. Doyeon, where is the first stop for Lee?
Good morning, Morning. I'm at the national headquarters of the ruling Democratic Party. Lee Jae-myung is currently not here. He's actually down at the southeastern port city of Busan. He started his official campaign schedule at midnight, actually, at Busan's Vessel Traffic Service Center, where a lot of ships leave Korea to export goods overseas. This sends a message that he wants to be a president who will boost the country's economy.
We picked the city of Busan, which will be the center of the southern capital, as the starting point to symbolize the growth of the economy for Koreans, and that we expand to the rest of the world through the sea and become a global leader.
Another significant aspect is that Busan is one of the country's most conservative areas. That said, picking this city as his first stop of the official campaign shows his attempt to win the hearts of voters in the region with the idea of unifying the country.
And Doyeon, just take us through what the remainder of Lee Jae-myung's schedule is going to look like.
Mark, it's a busy day indeed. At 9 a.m., he'll be at Bujeon Station, greeting people and holding rallies. Then he will slowly make his way up northward, taking the train up to Daegu, a city in a region he was born in. He is expected to say that he will become the first liberal president from the area. Then he will go to Daejeon, a city with a lot of government offices and known for scientific research. He is expected to pledge to develop the city as the country's center for science and research. Finally, he will end his day at the express bus terminal in Seoul's Seocheogu district at 7 p.m. The campaign team has said they chose it because it's a bus terminal that leads to the rest of the country and receives people from across the country, signifying national unity. That's all I have for now. Back to you.
Thank you for that, Doyeon. Now let's get a check on where main opposition People Power Party's candidate Yoon Suk-yeol is headed for on his first day of the campaigning trail.
Yeah, for more on that, we connect live to our Lee Kyung-eun, who's standing by at the party's headquarters in Seoul. Kyung-eun, fill us in.
Well, Mark, Yoon Suk-yeol is also looking at a hectic day today, and the busy day starts here in Seoul in about 15 minutes. He'll first pay respects at Seoul National Cemetery. Then he will attend the opening ceremony of his campaign in Seoul's downtown Gwanghwamun area and present his vision for the, quote, president of Gwanghwamun, for a president who was called by the people. Seoul is significant in this election because there are many swing voters here. But most importantly, Seoul has been hit hardest by skyrocketing housing prices, the biggest issue of this election. And this really makes Seoul a strategic place for Yoon to reiterate his calls for a change of government.
This election is to judge the corrupt and incompetent Democratic Party's government. This is an election that the People Power Party must win for the nation's future.
Now, Kyung-eun, what's on Yoon's schedule after he finishes in Seoul?
Well, after this, Yoon will be heading to the country's southeast, which is considered as a traditional conservative stronghold. If you remember from Do-yeon's report earlier, Yoon is actually heading in the opposite direction to Lee, who's traveling from south to Seoul. But do note that both candidates are targeting the same regional points: Seoul, Daejeon, Daegu, and Busan, which hold key swing voter segments. In Daejeon, which is considered to be politically neutral rather, you will likely vow to boost regional growth. Then in Daegu, the center of the conservative stronghold, you will mainly focus on mobilizing conservative supporters. Finally, in Busan, he will appeal to the younger generations, those in their 20s and 30s who are considered as the key swing voters, and present his visions for fairness. That's all for now. Back to you.
Okay, Kyung-eun, thank you very much for that report. Now, presidential candidates Sang-jung from the Justice Party and Ahn Cheol-soo from the People's Party are also kicking off their respective campaigns on this Tuesday with their respective strategies planned out. The two candidates are heading in different parts of the country in a bid to drum up support.
Our Kim Yeon-sing has this report.
Presidential candidates Sang-jung and Ahn Cheol-soo on the move. The candidate for the Justice Party, Sang-jung, on Tuesday is headed for the southwestern Honam regions as the first spot on her campaign trail. It will focus on appealing to this liberal stronghold with her main pledges, including a 4-day work week. Her first spot is Iksan in Jeollabuk-do province, where she plans to greet voters on their way to work. She'll also visit the Jeollabuk-do headquarters of the Hwasam Labor Union and the Iksan office of the Korean Federation of Trade Unions. Next on her schedule, Jeonju City, where she'll hold her official ceremony for entering the presidential race. The southwestern city of Gwangju will be her last stop of the day, where she'll pay her respects at the memorial altar for victims of the building collapse in Hwajongdong and campaign in Gwangju's U Square.
I think there are going to be more people willing to vote for me and the Justice Party. We are a political asset that can protect the future.
The People's Party candidate Ahn Cheol-soo is set to open his campaign in Daegu. After campaigning in one of the most bustling areas of the city, Pomo Crossroads, he'll head to Gyeongsang-buk-do province. His first stop there, Gumi City. He's scheduled to visit former President Park Chung-hee's birthplace and the area's central traditional market. He will then move to Kimcheon and Andong, where he'll campaign in the city's marketplaces. Ahn will wrap his day up in Yeongju City and visit one of the most time-honored family branches in the region, the Sunung-an clan, and hit the Gusong 5-way intersection.
If one of the most underdeveloped regions, Daegu and Gyeongsang-buk-do, developed properly, wouldn't that show our country's balanced regional development plan has succeeded?
Ahn's campaign route shows his strategy. He's hoping to win the hearts of voters from the conservative base, dominant in the Daegu and Gyeongsang-buk-do regions, as Ahn earlier proposed a merger with the People Power Party's candidate, Yoon Suk-yeol. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
Now, turning to other news, the UN Special Rapporteur on North Korea's human rights will arrive in South Korea in the coming hours to compile research and have discussions on the regime's human rights issues. According to Seoul's Foreign Ministry Monday, Thomas Oheya Quintana will be in South Korea until February 23rd. He'll meet with government officials, politicians, as well as civic groups and North Korean defectors to prepare an annual report to be submitted to the UN Human Rights Council in March. It'll be his 7th trip to South Korea since taking office in mid-2016 and the last before his term ends in August.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Last weekend, the top diplomats of South Korea, the United States and Japan declared a united front against North Korea after a rapid-fire series of ballistic missile launches by the regime throughout the month of January. Describing those launches as destabilizing, the diplomats also said North Korea must cease its unlawful activities and instead engage in dialogue. The three sides reiterated their commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and their readiness to resume talks with the North.
However, the regime has continually rebuffed overtures for talks from the Biden administration over the past 12 months. For more on this, we connect to Mark Barry, the associate editor of the International Journal on World Peace. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
So first, I'd like to get your reaction on the Hawaii talks, as well as your thoughts on whether they're likely to move the needle in terms of diplomacy with North Korea.
Well, this was a do-over from last November, when a trilateral meeting of deputy foreign ministers in Washington concluded with a one-person press conference by Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. So there arose a behind-the-scenes dispute between Japan and South Korea over a territorial issue, which led to the appearance of a fractured trilateral alliance. So this time, the three nations gave the outward appearance of unity on North Korea in Honolulu, but internally, I suspect that much time was spent discussing U.S. insistence on greater cooperation among its allies against China, reducing their dependency on Chinese trade, and in particular for South Korea, participation in Quad activities. So internally and outwardly, I think there were two different or divergent tracks going on. And South Korea reportedly offered some new ideas to engage North Korea. And then at a joint press conference, one Korean reporter asked a great series of questions about innovative approaches to the North. But unfortunately, he did not get a clear answer.
Right. A lot of the time what happens in these meetings, what is said privately and what is put out publicly in a statement is often rather different. North Korea has refused to, really the shutters have come down whenever the Biden administration has tried to engage in talks, or at least set the stage for talks. The North continuing to insist that it won't engage with Washington unless it drops what it calls the US's hostile policies toward the North. What can you tell us in terms of what the North considers to be these, quote, hostile policies? And can you see why the North views them that way?
Well, under President Biden, there was a Treasury designation last month of 6 North Korean citizens to be sanctioned who were involved in procuring materials for missile development. And in December, the designation, there was the designation of the DPRK Minister of Defense, actually for human rights reasons, as well as, believe it or not, an animation studio earning foreign currency, particularly for its offices based in China. So also there's been talk of additional U.S. sanctions and of resumption of regular joint U.S.-ROK military exercises. So that obviously is irksome to the North. And finally, I think the nomination of Ambassador Philip Goldberg, a former UN Security Council sanctions enforcer, as ambassador to Seoul, although he has yet to be confirmed, does not assure the North. So North Korea is really saying that the U.S. continues to have little to offer, that the U.S. still wants it to give up its defensive weapons and military secrets for what it regards as vague promises of what the U.S. might do in return. And so the U.S. comes across to the North, I think, worse than it did even 30 years ago, as essentially a superpower making ultimatums, while the North, I think rather realistically, is trying to counterbalance immense Chinese pressure that's largely hidden from view by creating ties with the U.S. But they want to do so accepted as a permanent nuclear power and not as just some junior power or partner.
Now, Mark, the latest talks happened when most of the international community's attention is focused on Ukraine now. Considering the geopolitical situation, do you think North Korea has slipped further down the Biden administration's list of priorities? And if so, do you expect North Korea to get back on Washington's radar?
Well, first of all, if Ukraine is invaded soon, and I mean this month, that may affect North Korea's overall strategy, depending on the U.S. response. But otherwise, I expect that they'll wait until after the Olympics, then slowly begin to test more missiles, although there'll likely be more of the intermediate range and SLBM or claimed hypersonic variety and not an ICBM. And this will continue past the March 9th presidential elections in the ROK, past the 110th birthday of Kim Il-sung on April 15th, and maybe until the new ROK president is inaugurated in early May. And by late May, President Biden arrives in Japan for a Quad summit and meeting with Prime Minister Kishida, and he may then fly to Seoul to meet the new ROK president. But I think the North will continue to abstain from nuclear tests because that will turn China and Russia clearly against them and forcing China and Russia to cooperate with the UN Security Council on more stringent sanctions.
And while we're on the subject of China, it's generally seen as the key to resolving the North Korean issue, if it can ever be resolved. But considering how tense the relationship is between Washington and Beijing right now, do you think there's anything South Korea, the US and Japan, even if they come together jointly without any of these side arguments, can do to resolve the situation without Beijing?
Well, as I see it, China was only helpful in the fire and fury days of 2017. Or if you go back to the first decade of this century, to the six-party talks of 2005 to 2008. But China has never been key to solving the nuclear issue because the North strongly distrusts them. Nonetheless, China insists that North Korea has legitimate security concerns and interests and urges tension reduction and negotiation with the North. And Russia, in fact, takes a similar tone, that creating a toxic atmosphere of pressure makes it very unlikely that the North will cooperate. Instead, it will likely redouble its efforts. So in the past, China has used its appearance of influence with North Korea to kind of put the U.S. in China's debt. But in fact, in my view, it has little political influence on the North, and the North Koreans resent Chinese attempts to interfere in the North's foreign relations. So the U.S. is now, in my view, unlikely in these days to ask for Chinese assistance with the North, unlike may have happened in previous administrations.
All right, Mark, we appreciate you making time for us. Thank you, as always, for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Now, as the geopolitical tensions between Russia and Ukraine continue to simmer, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has ordered its embassy in the Ukrainian capital to close. He said U.S. diplomatic operations are to be relocated to the western part of Ukraine. Blinken also stressed that further aggression by Russia would be met with a swift and forceful response. Kim Hyo-sun with this report.
Washington is closing the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv and relocating its staff to Lviv in western Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Monday that the decision was made due to a dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces along the border. He also urged any remaining Americans in Ukraine to leave immediately. Speaking on Monday with his Ukrainian counterpart, Blinken stressed Washington's commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. He added that any further military aggression by Russia will be met with a swift, coordinated, and forceful response. However, he did stress that Washington's immediate priority is to support diplomatic efforts to de-escalate tensions. This comes as the Pentagon said Moscow had strengthened its forces along the Ukrainian border over the weekend. Elsewhere, the European Union is preparing several responses against possible moves that could be taken by Moscow. Quoting a EU official, Reuters reported Monday that the 27-member bloc is seeking alternative sources of energy in case Russia cuts supplies to Europe. It's also preparing for the arrival of refugees should Russia invade Ukraine. Italy is mulling over whether to send up to 2,000 troops to Eastern Europe to bolster NATO's defense capability. The details will be finalized during a NATO defense ministers meeting in Brussels on Wednesday and Thursday. Italy's foreign minister is also set to visit Ukraine and Russia, seeking a diplomatic settlement of the crisis. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Mark. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Fears are growing over an imminent Russian invasion of Ukraine, with Western governments warning that Moscow could mount a major military assault at any time. According to US officials, over 130,000 Russian troops now are positioned outside Ukraine, with weeks of diplomacy obviously having failed to defuse the situation. Is war inevitable, or can it be prevented? We discussed the latest developments with Christopher Hartwell, head of the International Management Institute and Professor of International Business Policy at Seoul School of Management and Law and Professor at Kosminski University in Warsaw. Welcome back, Professor Hartwell. It's lovely to see you today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, Professor, it looks like tension is just escalating non-stop, and Western governments have been warning that there could be a Russian invasion any day, with earlier reports from the US claiming that it could be as early as Wednesday. Their nationals are being told to leave Ukraine as soon as possible. How dire is the situation right now?
Well, we're at a point right now where Russia is logistically equipped to invade. It's whether or not they actually have the will, whether or not Vladimir Putin has finally decided to take the step that they're going to go into Ukraine. You know, the mood in Kyiv and elsewhere in the country is calm, but more like grace under pressure, because this can actually happen. You know, there's been a lot of skeptics that said Putin isn't this crazy, he would never do anything like this. But the continued buildup is kind of reminiscent of World War I. You know, you do not mobilize your army, you do not move your army, so much of your army, and expose other flanks unless you plan to use it. And the longer that you keep troops on kind of the front lines, the more chances that there are that there's going to be an error, that there's going to be some form of perceived provocation, and that there is going to be a shooting war. So it's not dire, but it's not where we want to be in the world right now.
Well, the UK, the US and other European countries have been sending defensive weapons so far to the Ukrainians. But to what extent would they actually defend them if Russia does invade?
In terms of the weaponry, or in terms of the UK, the US, NATO?
NATO, and sending troops and really helping them.
Well, we're not going to get a hot war between NATO and Russia. We're not blundering into World War III, despite what I just said about World War I. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. And in fact, Ukraine probably had no chance of being a member of NATO up until 2014, when it was first invaded by Russia. And that's the only thing that's really kind of pushed the Ukrainian populace together and made them want to do something which they did not want to do before. They wanted to be this kind of neutral country in between West and East, be a friend to both, and just be this kind of conduit for both the European Union and for Russia. But Russia has forced their hand, and now they want to be in NATO. But realistically, in terms of defense, we see right now what is happening is that you've kind of created a cordon sanitaire at the eastern edge of NATO, which would be Poland. This is why the US are sending troops there. This is why the UK are sending troops there, maybe bolstering a little bit of the defensive capabilities of the Baltic states, although they are much more difficult to defend. Basically, we want to say to Russia, if they do invade, that they do not go any further, and probably not even into Western Ukraine. That's what the show of troops are, because, I mean, really 2,000 troops here, 45 troops there, isn't going to stop a full-on Russian invasion. But it's to say that this is NATO's border and you shall not pass.
And what shape are Ukrainian forces in right now compared to the Russian military?
They are much, much better equipped. They are much more cohesive. They are a better equipped and trained fighting unit than they have been at any time since Ukraine's independence at the end of 1991. And again, that has been forced upon them by Russia's invasion. They understand the lessons of what happened in Crimea, of kind of not resisting. They understand the lessons of resisting in Donbass, kind of the legendary cyborgs who defended Donetsk airport for over 100 days back in 2014, 2015. So, and it's become a much more professional military outfit. That being said, in terms just of numbers, Russia could overwhelm the Ukrainian troops, but the Ukraine could put up an incredibly boisterous fight. It depends, however, on kind of what the goals of the Russian military are. If they're going to have a large-scale land invasion, which we planned for back in the 1980s of tanks streaming through the Fulda Gap, or if they're going to do something much more targeted, if they're going to do something that has a lot more hybrid components, such as electromagnetic pulses, decapitation strikes, things like that. So it's very difficult for Ukraine to be able to handle all of the weapons that are in Russia's arsenal.
Well, for now, the Ukrainian president seems to be trying to keep the mood light. And while Volodymyr Zelensky's criticized the panic that the West has been stirring, he says that could, the panic that would ensue from these claims. And he said that he saw no such proof that Russia was planning an invasion in the coming days. What's the difference for his difference in position from the West? I mean, what do you think his game plan really is?
Well, the first thing is that he is a comedian. So in times of stress, he wants to rely on humor, and he wants to kind of draw on, even if it's dark humor, because he is Slavic as well. But you see it from his point of view. His country is now being squeezed. Russia doesn't have any additional sanctions on it because of what it's done, but Ukraine does. Ukraine is seeing Western airlines cancel flights to Kyiv because insurers won't take on the risk that comes with kind of the geopolitical situation. You see that the currency, the hryvnia, is being affected. You see that there is a possibility with kind of the naval exercises in the Sea of Azov that there's going to be a blockade. So there's real worries about economic collapse in Ukraine, but collapse isn't the right word, but there's worries about severe economic duress that Ukraine is going to be under. And if Zelensky can kind of present this face to the world, kind of to assuage investors, to assuage international markets, to assuage capital markets, then perhaps they can kind of stave off Putin actually having a victory without firing a shot. If he can just kind of tighten the noose around Ukraine's economy and have Ukraine collapse that way, then Putin wins. So Zelensky's really working to try and counteract that and present this kind of good face that Ukraine is still open for business.
And well, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK said that Kyiv might retract his bid for NATO membership to avoid war, but he later did a U-turn on his comments. He said that Ukraine was ready for many concessions in its negotiations with Moscow, but that it has nothing to do with NATO. How are you reading this?
Well, he was probably just speaking off the cuff. He definitely wasn't speaking in terms of kind of official capacity, the official line coming out of Kyiv to say that, NATO membership is something that we're willing to give up. He doesn't have the authority to say that. That's something that is coming out of Kyiv. In terms of concessions, I'm not really sure what Kyiv can make because Russia's demands have been so unreasonable, such as closing NATO's open door policy and saying that they have a veto on who gets into NATO and who doesn't. It can't be something to do with the eastern regions, the Donbass, and Luhansk, and Donetsk, that they're going to be absorbed into this neo-Russian empire, because that's a political non-starter across the political spectrum. So I don't know what the concessions they actually have in mind are, but they don't, even if they are having this consideration of this broad panoply of concessions, they don't match up with what Russia has demanded. And they can't, because Russia's demands are so unreasonable as to be ludicrous.
Now, would you say that it would be convenient for Western governments if Ukraine does drop its NATO bids?
It would be convenient, but there's empirical evidence that it doesn't matter. Ukraine was a neutral nation in 2014 when Crimea was grabbed by Russia, when Luhansk and Donetsk were invaded by Russia. So it doesn't seem that there's in Einstein's phraseology, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same result. Going back to neutrality, how would that actually aid the Ukrainian people? It would be nice from kind of the Washington, D.C., or especially from Berlin, if the Ukrainians said, we don't want to be part of NATO, and then that gave kind of D.C. and Berlin a cloak to kind of step away. But in reality, it's not going to solve anything. This isn't about NATO, and that's exactly where the Ukrainians are right. It's not about NATO. It's about Ukraine's right to exist and to be a sovereign nation.
And well, if Vladimir Putin does decide to give the order to invade Ukraine, then what would Kiev's response be?
Well, again, it depends on kind of the modalities. If it is the tanks rushing across, if it is limited strikes, if it is trying to kind of cripple infrastructure, if it is trying to install a pro-Russian regime, or if it's just kind of consolidation of the eastern part of the country. There were worries in 2014 and 2015 that there was trying to kind of make the land bridge to Crimea. So maybe that's what's in Putin's mind. Maybe it's kind of getting this land bridge not only to Crimea, but also to Transnistria in Moldova, another breakaway region, which is only broken away because of the permanent stationing of Russian troops. In any event, it's going to be bloody. Ukrainians have been training, they have been ready for this, they understand that this is their homeland, that there's no retreat. And it was mentioned in kind of the lead-in to here about refugees. The issue is that a lot of refugees in Ukraine would have to go to Russia because that's where their families are. They're not only going to the West. So why would you go to the aggressor? Why would you retreat there? That is your home. That is where you're going to make a stand. Ukraine probably and unfortunately will lose any battle with Russia if it comes to a hot war, but they can increase the transaction costs for Russia to make it not worth it.
Well, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he's speaking with Ukrainian, Russian officials this week, and Berlin's refusal to supply defensive weapons and take a more explicit line on sanctions against Russia has drawn the German Chancellor a lot of criticism. And while he is doing his best in diplomacy, how much power do you think he has in terms of influencing or persuading the Kremlin?
Not much, because the German left and the SPD party especially has a big Russia problem. I mean, you see kind of Gerhard Schroeder sitting on the board of Gazprom now, and it has been a Russophile, a Putin-phile for as long as we can remember. Same thing with Scholz, same thing with many members of the cabinet right now, the SPD-led cabinet in the German government. There isn't really, they're seen as useful from Moscow's point of view. They're not seen as actually having any sway. Fellow travelers in kind of the old communist parlance, it's not that Scholz is going to be able to convince Putin to back down. There aren't any levers. If anything, Germany needs Russia more because it's continued its reliance on energy. It's continued its reliance on Russian gas. And because it didn't do anything about Nord Stream 2. German businesses are against any kind of additional sanctions, and Scholz knows that. So the leverage is all on Putin's side. Unfortunately, it is not coming from the German side at all.
Well, in the meantime, US President Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, they agreed in a phone call that a diplomatic solution might still be possible. And while previous agreements have failed, as we all saw, but what kind of solution do you think they're thinking about, and what would it entail?
The worry is that, again, you get this kind of concert of great powers, this great power solution. And Russia, once again, feels that it is a great power. It's rattling its sabers. It should be respected as a great power. And you end up with the US and the UK going over the heads of the Ukrainians to either do something like take NATO off the table or to cede control of Donbass to Russia and say, okay, you have a legitimate national interest there, Russian speakers and so forth, even though that's a lot of, it's not a real reason to invade kind of another sovereign country. So the worry is though that they're going to go over the head of Zelensky, that they're going to cut a deal, peace in our time, and say, if we just give Putin this, if we give him this, if we have some other security guarantees, then perhaps we can de-escalate the situation. Other than that, I think we've gone the other way. The Biden administration has been screaming bloody murder for the past 2 weeks and saying it's an attack is imminent. Either they have fantastic intelligence and they're trying to call Putin's bluff, or they're really scared. And when people are scared of something happening, especially if they feel it's going to harm the poll numbers, which are already abysmal, then you look for really, really bad concessions.
Well, it was a privilege speaking with you again, Professor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Turning to our daily look at the action at the Beijing Winter Olympics, with the closing ceremony now less than 1 week away. European countries are dominating the medal table, but several big events remain up for grabs.
Monday was a quiet day for Team Korea, but on Tuesday, 2 South Korean women figure skaters start their single short programs. Han Sung reports.
Women's figure skating, the jewel of the Winter Olympics, begins Tuesday evening, and representing South Korea will be Yoo Young and Kim Ye-rim. Both are competing in their first Winter Games. In late January, just before Beijing 2022, Kim won bronze at the International Skating Union Four Continents Figure Skating Championships in Estonia, where Yoo finished 6th. But Yoo, the 2020 Winter Youth Olympics champion, is considered the nation's more likely bet at a medal. Pundits say, however, that she will have to flawlessly land her signature triple axel to have a shot at a podium spot over the more technically skilled Russian skaters. Among them will be the heavy favorite to win gold, Kamila Valieva of the Russian Olympic Committee, who has been the subject of great controversy for being allowed to take part in Tuesday's competition. Citing exceptional circumstances and the fact that Valieva is a, quote, protected person under World Anti-Doping Agency rules, the Court of Arbitration for Sport on Monday upheld an earlier decision by the Russian Anti-Doping Agency to lift a provisional suspension on the 15-year-old superstar after it was found she had tested positive for the banned heart medication tremetazidine on December 25th at the Russian National Championships. The drug test result was not revealed until February 8th, after she had competed in the team event at the Winter Games, winning gold. Valieva will be taking to the ice amid growing backlash against the ruling and Russia's long record of doping violations, resulting in its athletes competing under the ROC banner. Meanwhile, in bobsleigh, women's monobobsledder Kim Yu-ran finished 18th in the newly introduced event, which crowned Kaylee Humphreys of the United States as its inaugural Olympic champion. Beijing is Kim's second Olympics after Pyeongchang 2018, where she competed in the two-woman event, finishing 14th. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
South Korea's female curling team beat Japan on Monday to keep alive their hopes of qualifying for the semi-finals. The team, known here as Team Kim, beat Japan 10-5 after losing to the United States 8-6 earlier in the day. South Korea has now won 3 and lost 3 in the round robin. South Korea's remaining 3 games are against Switzerland and Denmark on Wednesday and Sweden on Thursday. They need to win at least 2 of those to stand a chance of making the semis.
And on Monday, French ice dancers Gabriela Papadakis and Guillaume Cizeron skated to their long-awaited Olympic gold. The 4-time world champions scored 226.98 points, breaking their own world record set in 2019. The pair came second 4 years ago in Pyeongchang when a wardrobe malfunction disrupted their performance. The Russian Olympic Committee won silver. The U.S. took the bronze. And now for a look at news from around the world, we have Lee Seung-jae joining us from Arirang newsroom. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys.
Yeah, good morning, Seung-jae. So we hear there is this historic visit by Israel's Prime Minister to Bahrain, and this is the highest level visit since the two countries improved relations under a US-sponsored deal that was signed in 2020.
That's right. So Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett did arrive in Bahrain's capital on Monday, marking his first visit to the country since the Abraham Accord was struck. So speaking to reporters right before the takeoff, Bennett said he hoped the visit would be seen as a message of goodwill and a shared stance against common threats. Now, during his two-day trip, he'll meet with the Bahraini Crown Prince and Prime Minister Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa. Now, Israel has previously offered to cooperate with its new Gulf partners, including Bahrain, on air defense, but has not specified whether this might include selling the short-range rocket interceptor, known, of course, as the Iron Dome. Now, big news for Greece, as they're set to repay the final portions of bailout loans owed to the IMF by the end of March, 2 years ahead of schedule. Now, Greece received more than $290 billion from the EU and the IMF during its decade-long financial crisis. Now, since then, it has made several early payments to the IMF and now owes $2.1 billion due in 2024. Now, Greece is still the Eurozone's most indebted nation, with public debt at almost 190% of GDP this year. The repayment is expected to help the country reduce the debt by roughly 1 percentage point and save about $56 million in interest rate payments. Now, at least one person is dead and several others injured after two commuter trains collided at a train station near Munich in southern Germany on Monday. According to the police, the accident occurred in the late afternoon when two trains collided head-on with each other. The trains had been traveling on a single track. Now, due to the large scale of the rescue operation, a portion of the track had to be closed temporarily. And finally, of course, Valentine's Day, usually filled with romance and affection, but Afghans had to scale back celebrations this year due to the return of the Taliban rule, which has enforced a strict version of Sharia law.
We had celebrated the past 2 years at a restaurant. Yesterday we went to a restaurant to make a reservation, but unfortunately we could not make a booking at any restaurant due to security issues and threats.
Not to mention, flower shop owners say that they used to see people buy flowers for their loved ones on February 14th, but now people are no longer purchasing them due to stricter laws, and not to mention the tough economic situation. Now, the Taliban had previously said cultural activities would be allowed as long as they don't go against Sharia law and Afghanistan's Islamic culture.
Good morning. We are back to mid-winter weather again. It feels almost like minus 10 degrees Celsius in the capital this morning. And highs will also remain below freezing. And in fact, it will get colder through Thursday with an expected low of minus 11 degrees Celsius on Thursday morning. What's more, a winter mix is falling in central regions and Jeollabuk-do province, which should let up as the morning goes on, but we're expecting another round of rain and snow from tonight. So Jeollado provinces could see up to 7 centimeters of snowfall today. And today is Daeborum, a holiday that celebrates the first full moon of the Lunar New Year. Central regions will have no problem observing a full moon, but the south will be covered with lots of clouds today. A sub-zero start for most part, and Chuncheon is beginning the day at just -8 degrees Celsius, so please stay well bundled up. Afternoon highs will be 7 to 10 degrees lower than yesterday. Gwangju topping out at 2 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gyeongju at 4 degrees this afternoon. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. Mark and I will be back for another episode of New Day at Arirang at 8 a.m. Korea time on Wednesday. I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
And I'm Mark Barim. Have a wonderful day, and thank you as always for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.